Hi, I'm Scott Turansky from the National Center for Biblical Parenting, and I want to ask the question today, should we force children to be generous? I think it's a really important question. Before we can answer that question, though, we need to talk about some other aspects of what generosity really is. So, what I'd like to do today in this interaction with you is explore this idea of generosity with children and try to understand if how generosity is helpful for kids. How do you develop it? How do you get to their hearts? What does it look like on a heart level? And so I am going to answer that question, or try to address the question, should you force your child to be generous? But I think it's important to ask the question what generosity is, first of all. The National Center for Biblical Parenting, we're looking for heart-based solutions for children. And so we're always trying to find ways to reach their hearts. And that means going into all kinds of different areas of their lives. If you go to our blog at thrivingkidsconnection.com, you'll see a lot of ideas there about what it looks like to reach a child on a heart level. This happens to be one of the questions that we're interacting with this week. I actually made a blog post about generosity there so that you can have some ideas and we can interact and brainstorm about ways to develop generosity in children. But I think it's important to ask that question about the heart because some children are resistant to being generous. Maybe they have more selfishness than really is helpful. And so generosity is hard. So do you force them? Do you force them to be generous? Well, let's start by asking this question. What is generosity and why is it important? You see, God has commanded us to be generous. And so we continually see in the scriptures that God has a relationship with us where he gave. And as a result, we are to be givers. We're the ones who are bringing peace to other people. We're the people who are sharing with other people. We're contributing to other people's lives. That's what we do because we're Christians and we're committed to Jesus Christ. So we look for ways to do that. Even at Christmas time, we're looking for ways to share with others. The challenge is that we all face selfishness inside of our hearts. Children experience that selfishness as well. So God has designed I would suggest a plan or a heart quality or an exercise, or even I would suggest a spiritual discipline of giving that increases our ability to think of others instead of think about ourselves. It's the ability to get outside of ourselves, to think about other people. So generosity, I think, is one of those qualities, or giving is one of those skills or disciplines that God has given us to enlarge our heart, to get us others focused and not just focusing on ourselves. Giving is important. We want to look for ways to do that, and I'm sure you're looking for ways to do that, and ways that you can encourage your children to give. But there comes a time sometimes in children's lives when they don't want to give. For whatever reason, they are stuck. And you're looking at them and saying they should be giving, but they aren't. Just take the example of the child who is playing and he should be sharing with his friend. And you know he should be sharing and he's just being selfish. Should you force him to share or not because you want it to come from his heart? I'm going to suggest that the answer to the question is yes. We're sometimes going to force sharing, force giving, so that we can build into a child a quality of generosity. Sometimes children think that because or parents think, or adults think that because the heart isn't in it, then they shouldn't require it. Maybe that comes from our understanding of 2 Corinthians chapter 9. You know the passage where God is saying to us, as Paul is writing to the church, he's saying that I want you to be generous givers, not out of compulsion. The idea is I want you to do it from your heart. So some people then would say, well, if I don't feel like giving, then I'm not going to give. I think that's a mistake and a misrepresentation of what God's designing in that passage. What he's saying there is you need to give. In 1 Corinthians 16, he's even describing the giving process. We need to be laying aside for ourselves every week an amount commensurate with our income so that we can give to others. That's what it says in 1 Corinthians. Now in 2 Corinthians, he's adding to that. He's saying, when you give, I want you to do it generously, not with this feeling of obligation. You just need to do it. So some people misunderstand that passage to say, well, if I don't feel like giving, then I shouldn't give. I'm not sure that's what the Bible is saying there. What I believe the Bible is saying is we need to be givers, we need to be giving, and we need to be producing generosity in ourselves so that we're doing it without compulsion. We don't back off on giving because we don't feel like it. I would suggest that's true in so many different areas of our lives, that we do what we need to do even if we don't feel like doing it, because that is responsibility. That is character. Sometimes parents say to me, oh, I wish my kids would want to do the right thing. Well, wouldn't that be great? But sometimes I, as a parent or as an adult, don't want to do the right thing, but I do it anyway. Why? Because I'm responsible, because I want to be mature, because I know that doing the right thing is the right thing to do, even if I don't feel like it. So now let's take that idea back now and talk about children, because children need training. Generosity is a heart gift. It's something that's going on in the heart, and when a person is generous, they think and they act differently than a person who's not generous. How do we help children start thinking about generosity? Just think about it for a moment. When you're being generous, you're thinking about another person and their needs, not just about your own. You're thinking about your resources and what you have and what you can give away. You think about sacrifice in order to bless someone else, not just think about yourself. That's what generosity is. It requires that we think differently. If we want our children to develop generosity, it's going to require some practice. We can't just say, well, I hope he'll develop generosity someday, and I'm going to wait until he does. I don't want to force him to do that. No, sometimes, as in my earlier illustration, we say to a child, son, you need to share with your brother or with your friend. If you're unwilling to share it, you need to go take a break, sit down there and think about it, because you can't continue to play with your friend until you're willing to share. Why do we do that? We're doing that because we're building some training. We're using training to build something inside of that child's heart. Generosity is one of those things we wish our children would have. And so we look for ways to build generosity. We look for ways to see a need that might be out there, or ways to help our children. But we're doing the requiring of giving of our kids because we want something deeper. We want them to learn how to be generous. Here's an idea that you might be able to use giving to produce generosity in a child's heart. Remember, giving is something they're going to do whether they want to or not. Generosity is something that comes from the heart, and that's what we're praying for. Some parents will say, well, if it's not coming from the heart, then I don't feel like I should require it. I think that's a mistake. Okay, just because a child doesn't want to go to church doesn't mean we allow him to stay home at 6 years old or 8 years old or 10 years old or something like that. What we want to do is we want to say to our kids, look, you're going to church with us. It's not optional. Even as a young person, a teenager, we say to kids, you're going to church. Well, I think a youth group is boring. Well, go there and make it exciting. The point is, it's not optional. There's some things we do in life that are required, and what we're doing is we're building a container in our children's lives, and we're praying that God will breathe life into that container. The same thing's true with giving. When it comes to giving, we as Christians are committed to giving to others, giving to our church as a priority, giving to other ministries, giving to the poor. We give. That's who we are as Christians. We should be doing that whether we feel like it or not. But then God is saying, do that with a sense of, not compulsion, but a willingness, with a sense of a heart that follows after that. That's what we want for our children. So sometimes we're going to say to our children, yes, you are giving. Yes, you are going to share. Yes, we're going to require it, because we want you to build something inside. I can't force you to be generous, but I do want to force you to share, because it's the right thing to do. And I'm praying that God will build something in your heart, that you will have such a generosity that you'll want to respond in the right way. Here's an idea. You might require that a child put some money aside every time they get paid, whether they get an allowance or whatever. If they get $10, maybe they would put $2.50 of that into an envelope, half of which, like $1.25, might go to the church. We just give to the church. That's what we do. It's good practice, and we're teaching children about that from a young age. We're not asking whether they want to do it. We're just requiring it because that's what giving is. It's a discipline that we have, and we're praying that God will be a generosity. But we still have the other $1.25 that's accumulating in the envelope. To say to a child, look, I want you to look around for a need that might exist out there. What's a need that you can contribute to? What's a way that you can help someone else? I want you to be watching, because there's some money accumulating there that is really the Lord's money that you want to be the vehicle through which God gives to someone else. Using that little example of giving in conjunction to money children receive is just one example. But we could be using the same example by giving a child $5 and saying to a child, look around for a need that's out there. How can you help? What can you do? So in some ways, we're requiring that a child respond well and do the right thing. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're saying, we're praying that God's going to do something in your heart. Look around for a need. Take initiative on your own. We're praying for generosity to develop, but we're not waiting around for that to happen. We're using training, something that God has commanded us to do with our children, to train them, and we use giving as a way to do that. So as you come to Christmas this year, I'd encourage you to look for ways to help your children be generous, for them to give. Certainly you may go the extra work of helping them give presents to other people in the family, to think about what the other person needs, and of course you're going to help do the shopping. It's a lot of extra work to train children, isn't it? But we do that because we're teaching them to give, and we're praying that God will do the deeper work in their heart, and that is to build generosity. If you'd like to know more about what I believe about this, I've written an article, and that article is in our blog at thrivingkidsconnection.com. Go and check out the blog. There's some ideas about how other parents are developing generosity. You can add some ideas at the bottom. We have lots of heart-based ideas at the National Center for Biblical Parenting. It's our desire to help parents understand how to reach their children's hearts, and there's lots of practical ways to do that. Let's use Christmas time to make that happen in their lives, especially in this area of generosity. God bless you, and have a great Christmas.